here. And
Well, but look at you. I mean, you don't really care what I have to say, do you? Honestly?
No. Look, if I gotta do...
One man showed up so wasted he couldn't even remember which show he was on. Another got the king of late night himself arrested. These are the highest guests Johnny Carson ever had on The Tonight Show.
New sponsor to The Tonight Show. Mrs. Paul's Light Soup.
And they only get crazier from here. Segment 1, Foster Brooks. And first, one man built an entire career off of showing up hammered. But here's the crazy part. He was completely sober. See, Foster Brooks was a comedian who spent decades as a struggling club act, barely making enough to keep the lights on. But in the late 1960s, while walking up to do a set at some small-town charity event, he had an idea. What if he just acted drunk? So he stumbled onto the stage, slurred his words, and played the lovable Lush. And the crowd absolutely lost it. That one performance changed everything, because Perry Como saw the act, brought Foster to open for him at the Las Vegas Hilton, and within months, the dude was sitting across from Johnny Carson on national television. I'm the executive in charge of editing movies for television. My biggest success was the famous movie, The Three Commandments, and the audience ate it up. Johnny was cracking up, the whole studio was dying, and here's what makes it even crazier. Foster was stone cold sober the entire time. The dude hadn't touched a drop in years. He got the idea from watching his own father goof around in the kitchen pretending to be drunk when he was a kid. I thought to myself, I wonder what these people would think if I'd make them think I'd been drinking? And the irony? Foster Brooks was actually a recovering alcoholic in real life. The man who made millions of people laugh by pretending to be wasted had quietly stopped drinking years before he ever got famous. He built the most convincing drunk act in comedy history, and he did it sober for over 30 years straight. Damn, this man faked his way to fame. But our next guest? He wasn't faking anything. Segment 2, Ed McMahon. Cause what if I told you Johnny Carson's own right-hand man showed up to work loaded? Yeah. See, Ed McMahon was the guy who opened every single episode of The Tonight Show for 30 years straight. He was Johnny's sidekick, his hype man, the voice behind the most famous 4 words in television history. Here's Johnny. The dude was supposed to be the reliable one. But in 1977, Ed showed up to a taping after what witnesses described as a few too many at lunch. And it was obvious. His words were slurring, his timing was off. The guy was swaying in his chair like he was on a cruise ship in a storm. Ed McMahon tries to maintain his composure after having a few too many at lunch. And Johnny? He didn't miss a beat. He turned the whole thing into a bit, cracking jokes at Ed's expense while the audience howled. But here's the thing. That one night followed Ed McMahon for the rest of his life. Comedians roasted him about it for decades. Talk show hosts brought it up constantly. The dude became the poster boy for drinking on the job. And the wildest part? Even Saturday Night Live eventually called it out. In a skit parodying one of Carson's anniversary specials, Phil Hartman as McMahon turned to Dana Carvey's Carson and said, "You were the one with the drinking problem." The thing is, Ed McMahon had been by Johnny's side since 1957. That's 35 years. They started together on a game show called Who Do You Trust? And Ed followed Johnny all the way to The Tonight Show and never left. The dude was the most loyal sidekick in television history. But one afternoon of day drinking turned him into a punchline that lasted longer than most careers. Man, Ed got cooked for one bad lunch. But at least he wasn't the next guy. Segment 3, Dean Martin. But no guest on The Tonight Show ever blurred the line between drunk and genius quite like Dean Martin. Because on December 12, 1975, Dino showed up and absolutely demolished the set. See, Dean Martin was already famous for playing the lovable drunk. It was his whole brand. The cigarette, the glass of scotch, the slurred one-liners. That was the Dean Martin package. And for most of his career, people assumed it was all just an act. His own daughter said he barely drank at home. One columnist who knew him for years said, Frank Sinatra actually spills more alcohol than Dean drinks. But that night in '75, something was different. How you been, Joey? How'd you get all of these people in your room? He called Johnny Joey. He didn't know where he was. He was stumbling through sentences like a man who had given up on finishing any of them. At one point, something he said was so out of pocket, NBC had to bleep the entire thing. And when the audio cut out, Ed McMahon and Bob Hope both got up and walked off the set. Dean Martin appears very drunk on The Tonight Show, December 12th, 1975. Now, to this day, people still argue about whether Dean was actually hammered or just doing the greatest performance of his career. Wayne Newton later told a crowd in Vegas, "How many of you think Dean Martin's drinking was an act?" When some raised their hands, Wayne shook his head and said, "No, he really liked to drink." God damn. That night is still one of the most replayed clips in Tonight Show history. And to this day, it's the ultimate Rorschach test for comedy fans. You either think Dean Martin gave the performance of a lifetime, or you think the man could barely stand up straight. Either way, it's one of the greatest 20 minutes of television ever recorded. But there are a lot more unhinged moments coming up. Like the night one guest made Johnny so uncomfortable he lost control of the entire show. Or the time the king of late night himself showed up to his own life hammered in a DeLorean. And we'll get to all that and much more. But first, we got to talk about the most legendary drunk entrance in talk show history. Segment 4, George Gobel. Cause in 1969, George Gobel walked into the single greatest ambush in late night history, and he had no idea it was coming. See, George Gobel was a comedian who'd had his own hit variety show in the 50s. By the late 60s, he was still funny as hell, but his career had cooled off. He was no longer the biggest name in the room. And that night, the room had some very big names in it. Cause when George walked out that evening, Bob Hope was already sitting there. Dean Martin was sitting right next to him, and both of them had been drinking, or at least acting like it, for the last 45 minutes. The crowd was already in tears. The energy was electric. And then here comes George, walking out with a plastic cup of something, looking like a man who had just realized he brought a spoon to a sword fight. But George didn't fold. He sat down, looked at Johnny, and said one of the greatest one-liners in television history. "Did you ever get the feeling that the world was a tuxedo and you were a pair of brown shoes?" The place exploded. Johnny doubled over. Bob Hope was crying. Dean Martin was wheezing. The audience was screaming. And while all this was happening, Dean was quietly flicking his cigarette ashes into George's drink without George even noticing. When Johnny finally caught his breath, he looked at the chaos around him and delivered his own legendary line. "Exactly what time did I lose control of the show? Now that's crazy. 4 legends, 1 couch, and enough liquor to fill a swimming pool." That clip has been replayed more times than any other moment in Tonight Show history. And George Gobel, the guy nobody expected to steal the show, walked away with the single greatest line of the night. Jesus, that's TV gold. That clip has been studied, replayed, and referenced more than almost any other moment in late night history. And the wildest part is that George Gobel, the guy whose career had been fading, the guy who nobody in that room expected to steal the spotlight, walked away with the single greatest line in Tonight Show history. He didn't need the booze, he didn't need the fame, he just needed one perfect sentence. And 50 years later, people are still quoting it. But I can't say the same for our next guest, cause his night didn't end with applause. It ended with handcuffs. Segment 5, Johnny Carson, the host. And look, having drunk guests is one level of crazy, but the host himself getting arrested for driving under the influence, that's a whole different story. See, for 30 years, Johnny Carson was the guy America trusted to close out their night. He was sharp, polished, always in control. The dude literally set the standard for late night television. But behind the desk, Johnny had a problem. And it wasn't a secret. Cause on February 27th, 1982, Johnny left his favorite Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills after having dinner with his wife. And let's just say the wine hit a little different that night. A police officer noticed his car had an expired registration sticker, but when the cop walked up to the window, it wasn't the sticker that caught his attention. Johnny's blood alcohol level came back at 0.16, that's double the legal limit at the time. And the car he was driving? A DeLorean. Yeah. The man who hosted the biggest show on television got pulled over in a DeLorean while hammered. You can't make this stuff up. The arrest made front page news. The New York Times covered it. Every newspaper in the country ran the story. For the first time in his career, Johnny Carson was the punchline. But here's where it gets legendary. When Johnny came back to the show, the entire country was watching. Everybody wanted to know, what was he gonna say? So Johnny walked out on stage, escorted by 2 fake cops in handcuffs. I regret the incident, and I'll tell you one thing, you will never see me do that again. The audience went nuts. It was maybe the biggest laugh in Tonight Show history. The bit lasted 5 minutes straight because the crowd wouldn't stop. He turned the worst moment of his public life into the greatest monologue opening ever. But there was a dark side to it, cause Johnny pled no contest to misdemeanor DUI, got slapped with a $603 fine, 3 years of probation, a mandatory alcohol program, and his license was restricted for 90 days. And that wasn't even the worst part. See, Johnny was a mean drunk. People who knew him behind the scenes said he was a completely different person when he was drinking. In 1987, NBC threw him a massive 25th anniversary party aboard the Queen Mary. His son Rick showed up, and he was drunk too. When Johnny found him, they got into a screaming match right there in front of network executives, celebrities, and family. Witnesses said Johnny got so aggressive he cocked his fist and was about to punch his own son before someone stepped in and stopped him. And 4 years later, in June of 1991, Rick Carson was killed in a car accident when his vehicle plummeted 125 feet off an embankment near Morro Bay, California. He was 39 years old. Johnny addressed it on the show, but those who knew him said he carried the guilt for the rest of his life. Damn, that's heavy. The man who made America laugh every night was fighting a battle nobody saw. But look, I think it's time we talk about what happened when Johnny weaponized the drunk guest for one of the greatest comedy moments ever created. Segment 6, The Drunk Guest Legacy. Cause here's what most people don't realize. Johnny Carson didn't just deal with drunk guests, he engineered an entire system around them. See, over 30 years and nearly 5,000 episodes, Carson developed a reputation as the most dangerous interviewer on television. Actor Robert Blake once compared sitting across from Johnny to facing the death squad. Guests who told bad jokes got blacklisted. Comedians who crossed a line never came back. And Johnny kept a personal Rolodex at his desk with handwritten notes on every performer. What he liked about them, what he didn't, and whether they were ever allowed to return. Kevin Nealon from Saturday Night Live found this out the hard way. During a stand-up set on the show, Nealon made a joke about drinking and driving around the holidays. He had no idea about Johnny's DUI. That was the last time Nealon ever appeared on a Carson-hosted episode. Howie Mandel got banned too, not for being drunk, but for bringing a $500 saber-toothed tiger prop onto the stage and using up half his time wheeling it out. Johnny didn't laugh. Mandel never came back. But here's the twist. When it came to drunk guests, Johnny didn't always shut them down. Sometimes he leaned into it. Because he understood something that no other host before him figured out. A drunk guest on a live show is pure, unscripted television gold. Think about it. The Dean Martin night in 1975 is one of the most watched clips in talk show history. The George Gobel brown shoes moment has been replayed for over 50 years. Ed McMahon's Tipsy night created a running joke that lasted decades. Foster Brooks built an entire Hall of Fame career pretending to be something he wasn't. Every single one of those moments happened because Johnny let them happen. He could have cut to commercial. He could have pulled the plug. Instead, he played the straight man, the calm center in the middle of the chaos, and let the drunk guests be the show. And that's the real genius of Johnny Carson. For 30 years, he sat behind that desk 5 nights a week, 48 weeks a year, and made it look effortless. He turned disasters into bits. He turned meltdowns into magic, and he turned a simple late-night talk show into the most important stage in American entertainment. The man had rules that nobody else had. If a guest bombed during their segment, Johnny would rush to a commercial break and the entire production team would swarm his desk like a pit crew at Le Mans to figure out what went wrong. If a comedian told a joke that crossed a line, they got the Rolodex treatment. One bad note next to your name and you were done. Joan Rivers got banned for launching her own show. Rich Little got blacklisted. A singer named Lola Falana got cut simply for being friends with Wayne Newton, a guy Johnny couldn't stand. But drunk guests? Those were different. Those were the moments Johnny lived for. Because he understood something that every late-night host after him has tried to replicate: chaos is only funny when someone is in control, and nobody was ever more in control than Johnny Carson. The dude hosted 4,531 episodes, more than any other late-night host in history. He launched the careers of comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Ellen DeGeneres, and dozens more. He won 6 Emmys, a Peabody, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And when he finally signed off on May 22, 1992, an estimated 50 million people tuned in to say goodbye. But what made Carson different wasn't the awards or the ratings. It was the fact that for 30 years, America invited this man into their living room every single night, and he never let them down. Not when his guests were drunk. Not when he was drunk. Not when the whole show fell apart around him. He just looked into the camera, cracked a smile, and said the line that defined an entire era of television. I bid you a very heartfelt good night. Man, they really don't make them like Johnny anymore. But celebrities getting wrecked on live TV is nothing new. Cause what if I told you one actress has been breaking every famous person she meets for over a decade? From roasting Kim Kardashian right to her face to leaving Robert Pattinson completely speechless, nobody does it like Jennifer Lawrence. Look, if you want to see more, you need to click on this video right here. Trust me, it's a banger.